That's everybody. Thank you. Thank you for your service and thank you for your support. I'm going to talk more about how that's important in a few moments, but I want to let you know that we have a tremendous mission opportunity just by being who we are as God's own people. Each of us has a network of friends and acquaintances and people we work with and people we play with and socialize. That's an important network. When I go into a congregation and ask the same questions, soon it becomes an obvious point that we are a connected people. We have a web of connectedness in our congregation. If there are 100 people in that congregation, and each person has 5, call it minimal, you've got 500 potential contacts. Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
We have 500 potential contacts. And so there's a great mission opportunity to care and support our veterans, our service members, and their families, not only within our congregation, but also within the community. And basically, that's why I'm here, to help us to kind of get started. It's not that difficult, and what I'm going to be doing today is kind of training you on how to reach out, how to engage, how to care for and support those who are in our community. Before I begin and go any further, let me just share a few elements about my background. I always think that's important, so that you know who the speaker is and where he's coming from. I was born and raised on Long Island, New York. My father was an aeronautical engineer, worked for NASA's space program for a while. I have one brother who lives out on the West Coast. Went to, I'm basically a system kind of guy. I went to Long Island Lutheran High School. I went to Concordia Bronxville, Concordia Senior College, Concordia Seminary, Vicared in Omaha, Nebraska. Great experience. I had parishes in Maryland, dual parish in Annapolis and Kent Island, Maryland. I went to another parish in Delaware. Was there for 5 years. Then entered with a little extra education and entered the field of specialized ministry. I wanted to emphasize my ministry to emphasize pastoral care and counseling. Worked for Lutheran Council of Tidewater for 12 years in the Virginia area, serving all of the Lutheran congregations in that region. Had a number of duties that included chaplain at a subacute care hospital, 330-bed hospital, chaplain for Norfolk Detention Home, and group homes, and I had developed a program for the reintegration of battered women back into the community using congregations as a primary support for their reintegration. Keep that in the back of your mind because you'll see some of that emerging in Operation Barnabas here. So I moved after 12 years in Virginia, moved and accepted a position to be president and CEO of Lutheran Services of Georgia, which is a statewide social service agency for our Lutheran churches in Florida, in Georgia, being part of the Florida-Georgia district. Worked there for 18 years and helped that program to grow from a little under $1 million to $14 million. Retired in 2012 following my first wife's death. And in 2013, Mark Schreiber, who was just mentioned a moment ago, and I had a conversation at a district convention, and he invited me to apply for Operation Barnabas. And I've been working for Operation Barnabas ever since that time as a part-time person. When I was on vicarage, I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and there was a chaplain from Offutt Air Force Base who seemed to have a very interesting, he was a great person, very caring, kind. He was a chaplain for the Air Force Strategic Air Command. And that kind of got my wheels turning and my blood pumping. And after several years of trying to figure out whether I wanted to do that or not, I then was sworn in as a first lieutenant as a chaplain in the United States Army and served in the Army for 30 years and graduated, retired as full colonel after several assignments in various places where I live. I was mobilized and deployed in 2001, 2 or 3 weeks after 9/11, and served in the Mideast for a year. Major event in my life, of course. I had been overseas on a number of times to relieve other chaplains who were deployed in Kuwait, and had been to Egypt and so forth. But I came back and then served as a chaplain for a reserve unit that helped other reserve units prepare and go to be mobilized and then receive them back again. And so what you're seeing is kind of the adjustment, the experience of not only myself, but seeing others adjust after their deployment. So at any rate, I have some experience in the back of my resume, and I hope that you will find that useful today. So we're going to talk about Operation Barnabas, and what we're going to do is talk a little bit about Operation Barnabas and give you an overview, talk about our motivation and purpose for doing this in the first place, and then move into a brief discussion about military culture and the effects of service. We'll talk about Operation Barnabas congregations and the chapter development, talk about how to get started. We have other congregations here represented, I understand, besides Christ our King. Is that correct? Would you raise your hand if you're from another congregation? Oh, wow. That's tremendous. I hope to get your name and address before we leave. Maybe David can help get a sign-in sheet going during one of the breaks. We'll take some breaks. I want to talk a little bit about how to develop a program, either as a congregation or as a chapter. And I'm going to share some opportunities and best practices that you have within your congregation, and just share what some of other churches are doing in their engagement in reaching out to veterans and service members and their families. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. This is an informal session. It's not a lecture. I hope that there's some engagement. If you have a question, raise your hand. If you have a comment or an experience you'd like to share, I think that's important. We're in this together. Although I'm kind of, leading the discussion, we learn from each other, and that's kind of my philosophy. I've got a lot to learn, and I'm hoping to share a little bit of what I have learned over the years. So let me begin. The ministry of the Armed Forces is part of our church body's endorsing agency. All chaplains in the military have to be sponsored by a church body. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod has a department called Ministry to the Armed Forces. The leader of that department is Chaplain Craig Mueller, Navy guy, and he is responsible for identifying and recruiting chaplains. He trains and supervises and monitors those chaplains. He promotes ministry, the chaplain ministry to the Synod and congregations. And since 2007, we conduct Operation Barnabas. If you're a chaplain and let's say you're a lieutenant colonel or a colonel or a captain in the Navy or whatever, and you mess up and the church pulls your endorsement, you leave immediately. You are no longer eligible to serve as a chaplain. That's how important the endorsement is by the church body of its chaplains. We have approximately 150, 160 chaplains, active duty and reserve, and Craig and his deputy, Steve O'Cana, help to recruit, train, supervise, and guide those chaplains in their career and kind of keep track of what's going on. All right, the evolution of Operation Barnabas. After 9/11, there was a significant turn of events in our nation's history, and we found that the armed forces was utilizing reserve chaplains to a higher degree than it ever had since World War II. And so that really changed the game plan for churches, because there are approximately 70, 75 reserve chaplains who are serving as as pastor of a congregation, and then they would find themselves deployed and then come back, and that coming back is a difficult transition. And so our church body, to its great credit, and I don't think there was any other church body who did this, because and out of their pastoral care concern, and I love this, they gave those congregations $2,000 so that when their pastor came back from his deployment, he had some time to spend with his family, get reacquainted and adjusted before he had to climb back into the saddle again. I think that was a beautiful part of our church. And that was part of the birth of Operation Barnabas in 2007, when the convention in Dallas met and said, we need to do something to help our chaplain pastors. That's how it started. But certainly it has evolved over the years. It has expanded to be a ministry. The first step was to expand its ministry to those who are serving in our nation's military in our congregations. And so there was an emphasis to take a look at, well, who in our congregation is a veteran? Who in our congregation is currently serving? Can we add additional supports to our congregation in order to help them provide pastoral care for those who are veterans and service members and their families in our congregations? Step number 2. Well, a few years later, step number 3. Let's not just be concerned about those veterans in our congregation. Let's also care about the veterans in our community. And that was the next step of expanding. We referred to Paul's ministry earlier. It expanded from Jerusalem to all over the place. And so Operation Barnabas now has expanded through congregations to include care for those who have served in our communities and their families. So in 2007, when Operation Barnabas was formulated, they chose the person of St. Barnabas, who means encourager, whose name literally means encourager. And one takeaway, this will be on the test at the end of this presentation. Our ministry as people, as church folk, is to encourage one another, to care for one another, to be thankful for one another. And so Operation Barnabas is a program where we help laypersons care for one another, not just in our congregation, but also in our community. Barnabas was a witness. He was a missionary. He went with Paul in numerous places. In fact, often in the New Testament, Barnabas is mentioned before Paul. Barnabas and Paul, did this, that, and the other thing. He was known as a healer, and he was a support companion for Paul in that ministry. That's our heritage, legacy. Operation Barnabas is first and foremost a faith response. Why do we do this? It's because of God's love in Jesus Christ, who was willing to sacrifice his own son. That much love, that kind of generosity and care, accepting people where they were and offering them eternal life in Jesus' name. We care and encourage one another because God cares for us in Jesus Christ. It's a faith response. Jesus urges us in John chapter 15 to love one another as I have loved you. Love one another. And that's repeated throughout the New Testament. And in Matthew, we find, that grand illustration of the sorting of sheep and goats and so forth. And he urges to go make disciples. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. Jesus urges us to go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of Jesus Christ. Jesus, we also find, redefines the nature of relationships. You know, he's challenged in Luke by a rather smart, wise-acre type lawyer who wants to really nail it to Jesus and show him up, and he challenges him, well, who was my neighbor? He tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, and then Jesus goes through the three people who passed him by, and the Samaritan coming to this poor guy's rescue. And then he poses the question back to the lawyer, well, who was the one who was neighbor to this man? And the lawyer had to define, well, the one who showed mercy. And that's kind of where we're going with this. We are called as Christians to be neighbor, to care for others as God has loved us, to make disciples of all nations. So Operation Barnabas is one of a relationship that has been changed because of God's love in Jesus Christ. When you look at the theme of Jesus redefining the nature of relationships, the character of those relationships, you find even when he's on the cross, suffering immeasurably, he's caring for his mother and for his disciple. He redefines that relationship. Mother, here is your son. John, here is your mother. He redefines the nature and character of our relationship. And then in Matthew 25, we find as Jesus saying, as you've done it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you have also done it for me. So, Jesus brings us into a new realm of relationships. Not only speaking to the character of the relationship, but a whole host of other folks who we may not have thought of as being a part of our family. So he brings us into new relationships, and in our case, we're talking about service members, both active duty and reserves. We're talking about veterans and their families, both immediate and extended. And I want to talk a little bit about that for a moment, because oftentimes we miss the opportunity for ministry within our congregations and within our community. We use the term military connected. Operation Barnabas seeks to help our church minister to military connected people. And that means spouses and widows and widowers. You know, oftentimes when we talk about service to the military, we're talking about the service person and maybe their immediate family. We often don't think about all of the other people who are connected and caring and supporting of those folks. So talking about spouses and widowers, parents and grandparents, siblings, friends, neighbors, caregivers. Have we considered the number of caregivers who may be in our congregation or in our community who are caring for a veteran? And contractors. Let me say quickly about grandparents. I've remarried a couple of years ago, and my wife has a granddaughter, a grandson, and her spouse, and both of them are deployed. So it's his son, grandparent, parent, and his wife who are taking care of the child, and have done so nearly a year. Now I say that because oftentimes we don't realize how a military life, how being military connected affects the whole family system. So they've been caring for this 2-year-old for nearly a year. So the mission of Operation Barnabas is to honor and support all military-connected people and veterans within the congregation, within the community, with reserve component emphasis. We had a couple of National Guard folks here. Would you raise your hands? Okay, there's one back there. I thought there was another one. There's some others folks right here. But when a National Guard or reservist returns from a deployment, they don't have access to the kinds of help and services, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but they don't have complete access to all of the benefits that the military may offer someone in need upon their return from a deployment. And so what our church does, again, out of pastoral care, what our church realizes is that we have approximately 6,000 congregations all over the United States, many in small communities where there are armories and units that are located that may be able to fill the gap a little bit. Not necessarily that you're going to be a therapist or that you're or something of that nature, but you can certainly be a friend and be a support encourager for those folks who return to a community that is unaccustomed to receiving or understanding the military culture. And I have more about to say that in a moment. So the vision of Operation Barnabas is that every military-connected person lives in the hope and peace of God's love and mercy as revealed in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's our vision. Wouldn't it be great if we could all live in the hope and peace of God's love and mercy as revealed in Jesus Christ? I'm going to pause for a moment. I have a copy of my presentation that we can have duplicated if you wish, so that if you want to talk about it, go over, and maybe one of the pastors can assist those who are interested. Just see me after the presentation, and we'll make a copy available. Also, I have older versions of this on the website that can be downloaded on our Operation Barnabas. And I will put this, because this is a little fresher than the past ones, but I will put this on the website also, so that you can download it if you want. So at any rate, our mission of Operation Barnabas, we have our vision, is that called by Christ's love, Operation Barnabas engages, empowers, and equips LCMS faith communities, congregations, and there are other entities, LWL and so forth, to provide hope, healing, and support to military-connected persons living in their community. Our guiding value is that of one of honor, and that is in gratitude and with respect, we demonstrate love for military members and their families, past, present, and future. Our guiding value of grace, that is God's undeserved love and forgiveness with the power to heal brokenness, as expressed to the community of faith. And compassion, which is the essential application of God's grace, acknowledging, caring for, and walking alongside those needing hope, healing, and strength. We chose the term walking alongside because we want to make sure that it's not a helper-helpee kind of thing. We're an encourager. We're in this together. And so we walk alongside and share and bear one another's burdens as a co-equal. So it's a mission opportunity to our service members, our veterans, their extended families, and also to our chaplains who need your help. Operation Barnabas is intended to be led by lay persons. The pastor should be involved and know about what's going on, but its intention is that this is a lay-led and lay-driven effort to engage and support our nation's military veterans and their families. We have several characteristics that we talk about. First, it's a grassroots, flexible ministry. This is not a top-down, this is the formula that you use that's imposed from St. Louis or anywhere else. This is a very flexible, usable effort. It's more, I don't like to talk about it as a program so much. It's an effort to engage and support. It's relationship-based, where you and I, as friends, we minister to each other out of who we are. It's great sometimes that we send care packages, that we do this or we do that for someone, but it's basically a ministry of caring out of our own heart, out of who we are as Christ's redeemed. We care for one another as brother and sister in Jesus Christ. It's designed to address specific community needs, and it's tailored to utilize the unique strengths and assets of the congregation. This community is very different from a community that's in North Carolina, in many ways, or in Naples, Florida. This congregation is different. It has different assets and abilities and so forth, and that's very different than many other congregations in other areas of our United States. And so what we're trying to do is to have our congregations do kind of a quick assessment of your strengths and abilities, and then a quick look at the community and what it needs, and to marry those two together. And it's not hard at all. Basically, Operation Barnabas is a network. We train, provide resources and support to help you, to help us engage those who are military connected. So we talk about two levels of Operation Barnabas. One is the congregation level. That's kind of the beginning effort. For example, an Operation Barnabas congregation is typically an event and internal oriented. And that means that there may be some honoring vets during worship services. They may be mentioned, the service members may be mentioned in public prayer. There may be some sending and receiving ceremonies for deployed member soldiers, and I've got examples back there on the desk. And on our website, there are examples of little litanies that can be used when sending someone off and then receiving them back. And also for recognizing veteran service in the past. Maybe a congregation has a static display of past and present service members. And maybe you celebrate a Ministry of Armed Forces Sunday. These are just some examples of when a congregation begins to have some awareness of the importance of caring for and honoring our Armed Forces members. A chapter is the next level up. It's more structured and it's ongoing. They may meet on a regular basis, and there's usually some long-term planning. There's also usually a community outreach and engagement. That is, they may partner with other military support and resource organizations in the community, and maybe there's a congregation near a post or base that serves as a point of contact. More recently, we've added another component, and that is adopt a chaplain. Do you really know what a chaplain does in the military? And oftentimes the job of a chaplain changes with that assignment. And so there's a grand variety of responsibilities that our chaplains may assume in one assignment as opposed to another. It's our effort to kind of connect chaplains who are way out there. They're our missionaries to the nation's military. And it's a way of helping to connect them with the larger church. So it's basically, there's no money or anything that's involved. It's basically a communication, finding out what's going on with that chaplain, what his ministry is like, how his family is doing, following his career progression and so forth. It's an opportunity to connect and understand better our synod's ministry to our armed forces. I'll talk more about Adopt a Chap later. I'm going to pause for a moment here and ask if we've had any questions or thoughts that may have bubbled up at the moment. All right, I've got an engaged group here. Okay, yes, ma'am.
I got a brother who doing lots